And so we won't make it too intellectual tonight because we have a great opportunity. As Fleur has not been able to come tonight, we'll be able to persuade you that actually, as Nigel Farage has said, Labour are going to get a thumping majority. Now, you wouldn't normally hear the Reform man say that, but what it means is that you now have a very open choice. Your last MP before 2019 was Justine Greening. From what I hear, she did a good job, doesn't matter which party it was from, but then she decided to leave politics, and the Labour incumbent has been saying she's working hard for you, and who am I to comment, but we'll get a better comment from here. So the philosophy of the Reform Party is really to lower taxes, to deal with your problems, like Wimbledon, if that is a problem, the Wimbledon refund, the huge number of illegal immigrants, which challenges our NHS, our housing system and everything else, and makes your life more difficult because you can't get a house and you can't get a doctor's appointment. So we're for lower taxes, and we're also for supporting the 5 million people in this country who have their own small businesses. So we're not all about Pharma and BP and Shell making, and those dreadful water companies making huge profits and giving it out to people. So we're for the smaller business when we want to support them, and that's what's important. And I think that stretches over into economics. You've heard recently, and I think Nigel Farage is probably very clever because he's let everybody go down this rabbit hole about who started the war in Ukraine. You don't really care in here who started the war in Ukraine. What's really more important is the fact that your fuel prices and cost prices have gone up because of it. And actually, I think probably the real reason is a much weaker American president. Nobody's been able to dreadful man Trump was in the thing, but now we've got that idiot Biden. I can be really rude about that, both of them. You know, Putin just thought, well, nobody's going to do anything about it. Biden won't care, and you can't remember what the time of day is. So that's my answer on that. You can ask questions about that later. The reason I've got to leave at 7 is that they're working me over hard. We've got much fewer people in the Reform Party, and it's growing all the time. And therefore, I'm going to 2 other hustings tonight. I'm going to listen to Mark Burker and support him, who's the neighbouring designate MP. But I'll finish my time by just saying you have a real choice now. You really must vote for reform, because Labour will get a thumping majority across the country, so you don't need to re-elect your wonderful current MP, and I will finish on that, and that's my time. Thank you.
Let's go to Heiko.
My basic philosophy is socialist, and I've been doing Karl Marx walking tour for a long period of time, so you can gather that it also is inspired by Marxist ideas. I believe that society is riven by internal conflict. The internal conflicts are endemic to the social system we live under. I believe the system we live under should correctly be characterised as a system of capitalism. And by capitalism I mean a society in which the decisive levers of the economy are in private hands, and where the monopolisation of wealth and power produces a particular constellation of social behaviour and social organisation. So in other words, those who own and control the means of producing wealth in society in the commanding heights of the economy, so the pinnacles of society, so the top 100 or 150 companies in Britain, or the top 700 or 800 companies in the world, dominate and shape the entire fate of humanity. And they produce governments, they produce a mass media, they produce an education system, they produce a way of thinking that corresponds with the interests of that class which accumulates wealth in order to make profit for themselves. It's not because they're evil people, but because that's the nature of the system that we are born into. We're born into a system that appears natural and normal, and only in certain periods of severe social and economic crisis do we begin to realise that this is a system that is not necessarily permanent, rather it's a transient system, and it's a system that can and should be changed. And for the last 150 or 170 years, society in the Western world and then later in the rest of the world has been governed by this internal conflict between the classes arrayed around who owns and controls the means of production and those people who work for a living, the working classes, the labourers, the people who produce wealth in society, commodities for sale on the marketplace. The capitalist class, in my opinion, as I said, are not an evil class, a monstrous class. Some of them are, but that's not the point. They act according to the way they're positioned within society, just the same as a policeman, when they're given a uniform, acquires a certain power, and often, more often than not, acquires a particular type of behaviour corresponding to that type of power. The same as you see with a doorman, a bouncer in a club. They behave a certain way after a period of time working in a certain type of job. Human beings' behaviour is determined by their condition. Their consciousness is created by their conditions. And therefore, when discussions take place in politics, it's often the case that the discussion is actually using language that conceals behind it different interests. So, for example, in 2003, we had a war in Iraq, and that was referred to as Operation Enduring Freedom. The word freedom meant freedom for the ruling classes to occupy and control Iraq. I'll do more a bit later, but my time's up. Thanks very much.
Well, follow that. One lead, Lee Roberts. I'm your Conservative candidate. Very, very quickly, because of that, it's worth explaining what creates us all, because ultimately we're all the products of our background. And I am a happy, free market capitalist. So I'm probably not much to be opposed to what Heiko's just said. But enormous respect for your point of view. And also I can see certain similarities of approach of thinking. I mean, my background has probably formed me. I'm 55 years old. I was born in 1968. My parents, born on a council estate respectively. Dad started a small business. They bought this detached house on the edge of a larger council estate in the West Midlands, in Walsall. And I was born a year later. And my background was my dad working for himself with one other guy, then another guy, when things, a good year for us was 4 people working for me. So it's a small stage capitalist unit. And it worked well for us. I then passed 11 plus when we had grammar school still, and got to that school, and that gave me a great education. And from there I went to a university, which I'm proud of, and did some things I'm proud of there, and learned about politics. So I'm in lots of respects someone who's pragmatically conservative, because it's worked for me. And I go back to what my mother said when I was about 8 or 9 years old, saying, Labour wants to make everybody equally poor, whereas the Tories want to give you a chance to do well, and make you free and keep taxes low. And ultimately, that's what I stand for. That's my political dogma. That I want to have a pragmatic approach to the problems in society, based around maximising personal freedom. The smaller the state, the better. And also with that comes low taxation, so ultimately people can spend the money that they have on what they want to. Now, I absolutely, and this is where we do agree, accept the challenges, the real challenges in society of global big business. I get that, and I completely accept that we've got to manage that carefully. Equally, there is a natural tendency in technology to drive towards consolidation that impacts on economic issues as well. And so the job of government has to be to make sure the market is always as free and as fair as possible, so the consumer, us, has the chance not to be exploited. Either exploited as workers, working for those organisations, or exploited as consumers. And I come back to the fact that no system is ever perfect. But I would certainly say that where there's been a stronger move towards free market capitalism, people are freer, happier, and more affluent. And ultimately, the danger of what we hear about with socialism left untrammeled is North Korea or Cuba, where people are oppressed by often a very small, and arguably a corrupt minority who run the society through party membership. And that's why I am what I am, and that's why I'm happy to debate tonight, and I hope we have a good discussion on it. Thank you.
I'm not going to read the statements from the other parties yet, because we have limited time with Peter. I think it's a better use of his time that we continue with questions, and I'll read their statements at the end. If I forget, please someone remind me. Or maybe rubbish, but I'll try to remember. Okay. So, questions. Anybody got? Oh, I think your hand up quite quickly. Yes.
So, question for the reform candidate. You say there's no point. You can vote any way you want, because we all know that Labour is going to win a landslide. One of the reasons why Labour is going to win a landslide is because you've split the right-wing vote. Do you accept that?
No.
You don't accept that? And I would also say one of the lessons from the 20th century was the Liberal Democrats, the Liberals, and Labour, they split the left-wing vote, and they let the Tories in for more than half the 20th century. And I think there's a risk that reform is going to do the same thing with the Conservatives and split the right-wing vote. So what do you have to say about that?
Around a minute and a half or
It's
so.
a very good question, very good point. And I am originally, by birth, a Conservative, and probably in most elections voted Conservative. I never voted Labour. So my sympathies lie there with these parties. What I would say is that I'm afraid, where he probably wouldn't agree, is that the Conservatives over 14 years have let us down, and most people want to give somebody else a chance. Now, it is an argument that the formation of the Reform Party out of the ruins of UKIP and getting us Brexit is splitting the Conservatives. But I'm afraid if we did nothing, the brave man does nothing, doesn't prove any success. So in the short time I've got, sorry, can you stop moving your paper at the back? You're really annoying us all here. So you can't hear what I'll say. I guess an extra 10 seconds.
Of course you do.
Sabotage.
So the last thing that I would say is I respect your point of view, and actually I'm working with Lee. We don't have a plan yet, because he's very suspicious of any sort of discussions between himself and myself. But I'm afraid the Conservatives have failed over their promises to stop the votes. They've not done, they've had enormous problems with the enormous amount of money they had to spend on COVID, which they did very well with. And so we will see that a lot of people feel the Conservatives have failed them. They want to give them a bloody nose, if that's an expression I can use, and they want to see somebody else. And they, as a Liberal Democrat isn't here, I can say they don't think the Liberals are strong enough. And Nigel is, for all his faults, is a natural leader, and therefore they feel he can do well, get elected in Clapton, and come in and help the Conservatives move back towards the centre again, because they've drifted off to the left too much. And therefore you'll see lots of fireworks after the 4th of July. And I'll be an MP by then too, because you'll all have supported me. I'm very glad the Liberal man isn't here, because he's just a bit more good looking than I am. And so there we go. Of course, it's very important in electioneering in America, but there we go. Right, thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody else would like to comment on
Yeah,
that?
that's it.
We'll come back to you, don't worry.
I'm jumping because I'm the one actually not benefiting this, shall we say, having my vote split. I mean, I got involved in this game because I've always been interested in politics, but I gave it up after I left university and then got on with my day job and everything else. But I watched Parliament pulling itself to pieces in 2017-18 over Brexit. I voted Remain, like most people I know in the southeast of England. Went through the management of my own grief after that, and then thought, well, okay, the public voted for it, so we've got to make the best of it. Let's just get on with get it done quickly, and then move on to the real challenges that we have in, we know about the challenges with the health service, the aging population, the role of the state, etc. And this seemed to drag on for ages because there seemed to be elements of the country that wanted to try and frustrate it. I wanted to get over it and make it happen. And that's why I got annoyed with the calibre of people we saw in Parliament then. And I just started looking around, what did I really think and which party was the right one for me? And for a number of reasons, I rejoined the Conservative Party. I liked the people more there. And I felt that I was at heart a Conservative. And so that's why I've been doing what I did. My own view is that there are lots of crises that parties go through because we have essentially a binary system in Britain because of the way the Parliament sits. It's first past the post, there are two sides of the House. There were debates we could have about whether we should go PR and have a semicircular like they were doing in France, but at the moment we have what we have. And so every major party, and by that I mean the two major parties, is a coalition. Each of them is a coalition, left and right, and they make the coalition work. For lots of reasons, I've got my own theories I have to talk about why that's broken down in both parties. The Labour Party is going through a more disciplined stage now. The Conservatives are going through a less disciplined stage where people can't be whipped and people are breathing against each other and it all looks very chaotic. I would love to come back into the party and have a role there to try and rebuild it, putting it crudely, to create the party I want to vote for, and I've lived in Clapton, and I guess that's very similar to what people in Putney vote for, which is going to Simple, pragmatic responses, nothing too ideological, centrist right, because that covers the broadest range, and one that will be a good effective government to the next 5, 10, whatever years we have. My worry about reform, and before Brexit, before UKIP, is it's a very disruptive force. And looking at it in detail, I worry about the calibre of people behind the Reform Party, what their real aim is. I have a genuine belief that their aim is completely nihilistic. They want to blow it up. They want to have 5 years of Labour and use that period to try and leverage a new role for, quote, a new party reform, which is re-established as not a Conservative Unionist Party, but a Conservative Reform Party. That's what they want to do. I know it is, because I've seen them at close range. And that worries me, because I just want to get on and create a party which is an effective opposition or an effective government and does a good job and people vote for it. Not one that's pulled apart by disruptive elements, because that damages the country.
Thank you very much. Excellent. Heiko.
Okay, in the original Putney debates in 1647, Cromwell's army met in St Mary's Church and they discussed the idea of universal male franchise. And the idea was divided the forces of Cromwell's army based upon the idea that one is all men are made by God and a given reason, and therefore they should have the right to vote. And on the other side there was another faction that represented the propertied elite who believed you should only have the right to vote if you have a stake in the country, if you own something of the country. And that really only changed with the end of the 19th century, when the struggle for the right to vote achieved largely by the labour movement, by the emergence of the working classes, who could also exercise economic power by withdrawing their labour, by going on strike, by mobilising to show their force and introduce change. And that led, one, to the right to vote for men, and two, later for the right to vote for women after 1928. Now, how does that connect in? Because I believe that fundamentally the right to vote does enable the working class to exercise so much power, theoretically at least, that they would be able to transform property relations and abolish the system of private ownership at the top of the commanding heights of the economy. And therefore, what has happened since the right to vote was granted to men and women is that everything has been done by the mainstream political parties and by the capitalist elite to influence the workers' parties by grabbing a layer of the leadership of the working class and making them serve their interests to prevent a transformation of society. And I think that the final phase in the capture of the Labour Party took place in 2019, when Jeremy Corbyn was removed as leader, or defeated as leader, and then expelled from the Labour Party. And I've been working in the Labour Party since I was 17 years of age, up until I was 59 years of age, and hoping that there might be change one day in the Labour Party that brings about a transformation to make it a genuine socialist party. I no longer believe that is a viable possibility. And the polarisation in politics that we're witnessing, both in Britain and in Europe and in the United States of America, is a reflection of the fundamental transformation in the economic system, a worsening of the conditions in the crisis of global capitalism since 2008, that will result in continuing polarisation, and I believe that polarisation will reflect itself in the emergence of a right-wing force around Nigel Farage, possibly some Tommy Robinson supporters linked in on the outside of that, and on the other side there will be the emergence of a powerful left-wing force linking together forces like Jeremy Corbyn and the Workers' Party.
Thank you very much. Would you like to comment?
I don't want to take up too much time. But just on a point of fact, I think you referred to women getting the vote in the Trentons. It was only with that same act that male servants got the vote. And that was a Conservative Party act. There had already been a Labour government which hadn't done anything. It was the Conservatives who did that. So I'll just say that reform, social reform, isn't just a prerogative of the left. It's also a prerogative of the right. I mean, Lord Shaftesbury, he was a Conservative who stopped sending women and kids down the mines and up the chimneys and all that. So that's a Conservative thing. Disraeli expanded the franchise massively, again Conservative. So I totally get and support your advocacy of social reform, social political reform, but you're not the only ones who think that. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm mindful that you need to go pretty soon, Peter.
Yep.
Do you want to respond, make a final statement before you go? How are you fixed for time?
Yes, I mean, we've been on 3 or 4 panels now, so we're understanding where we're all coming from. It's important that you understand where we're all coming from. I think I've made a reasonable opening statement. I would come back to you just on the point of you saying that the Reform want to do something with the Conservatives. And actually Nigel has been saying that he does want to do that, but he doesn't want to take over the Conservatives. He wants to come in, shake it up, and you will still remain a Conservative party, whether it's got some vulgar word tacked on the end of it or not, I don't know. But he thinks you've lost your way, not you personally, but your party. That's evidenced by the polls. Okay, fine, doesn't matter. And so therefore he thinks the Conservatives have lost their way. He's standing as a leader, and therefore he's very big for small business, for giving you lower taxes. So he's going to have a tax threshold raised to 20,000. So everybody in this room will get an extra £1,340 a year because of lower taxes, and he'll do something for the people in higher bands, but they're not important to us. So I would just say, take this chance. You don't need Labour to be here anymore. Vote for reform, and we'll work with the Conservatives to make a better Britain. So that's what I would say.
Thank you.
We're talking about money, so we'll stick to that. So backhander deals during COVID to their friends, and at the moment the papers are telling us again and again that Rishi Sunak, correct me if I'm wrong, his campaign, I'll be quick, campaign leader, his personal protection police officer, and someone who's standing in somewhere, and potentially others, have been doing economic fraud, which is what we're talking about tonight, the economy, having inside knowledge about when the election is and putting money on it. And so my question is, to Lee, you're constantly in trouble, constantly doing, the Tories constantly up to no good. Tonight we're sticking to money and not other stuff. And the things that, like this, what they're doing, the public don't like that. They don't like a party, hang on one second, they don't like a party where, you're secretly, when the election is and you're putting big money on the bookies and getting big returns while everybody else here is grafting. How do you explain yourself?
Well, first of all, I'm curious about it, because I'm spending 18 hours a day, genuinely, working on this thing. I've never been in trouble with the law. I pay my taxes. I agree, it's awful. If it is, as we think, as it's been portrayed, a form of insider reading, then they should be pursued with full force of the law. I've got no problem with that. Likewise, people that were defrauding us during the COVID situation. Listen, I'm brand new. No one's paid me. I have no backhanders. I'm so new in this party. I'm completely, don't say green, but you know what I mean. I'm not touched by any form of politics. So in terms of the things you're talking about, so I can take a very, very moral high ground with it. I think we should, if they are guilty, take the appropriate action. And that's what the Prime Minister said, to be fair. So I'm just saying the same. But I agree. On a personal level, it makes my job very difficult because I want you to vote for me. I believe, I think this is, dare I say, still a 2-horse race in terms of the party that most likely to get the vote. I think I can be a better MP than Khoo. I can be more in touch with people. I can be less beholden to the main party, and I will be there to hold the mayor to account, the local council to account. If, as we hear, there's going to be a large Labour government, I'll hold on to account. As I've said frequently, I will happily and joyously be a pain in the arse for anyone on your behalf. That's my promise, I've always said it. I'm beholden to nobody. I have chosen this party, the Conservative Party. They've accepted me, they've backed me as a candidate, and so therefore I will loyally present their policies, and I will try and create policies, if I'm in that party as an MP, to improve what I believe will improve society. I have no time for corruption. No time for silly low-level corruption like we're finding now, which just tarnishes all of us. I have a theory why this sort of thing happens. I'll be quite outspoken, very outspoken about it. This sort of behaviour exists in all parties when they're allowing people who have no real-world experience to become powerful. If nothing else, I'm an absolute passionate defender of people who should go into politics having done something else. Because if you go from university, student union, whatever, left, right, centre, people now in the government who come from that sort of background. And this government, next government, all parties. They go straight from university, student union, they work for, on the right, they might work for a think tank, an MP, they'll go and work for public affairs. On the other side, they'll go and work for a trade union or a charity. You're getting a political class now, people who are becoming MPs in their early 30s, who have no real world experience. They know how to run budgets or hire people, or dare I say, even fire people when time comes. That's what many of us in the real world have to face. Now, I've had that. I'd like to bring that to politics and say, look, I'm 55, I can do X number of years now, apply that experience to make politics a better place. That's my pledge. So I agree, it stinks. But I have to say, I really do believe that if there was a Labour Party in power, you'd be talking about just as bad things happening. I mean, because we've had 14 years of one party, there are more examples of this. You know, you get back the Labour Party, even back to Harold Wilson, you find examples of corruption, people taking backhanders. So it does sadly happen in politics. Now, power corrupts. Let's make sure we get people who recognise that and are as exposed as possible to avoid this sort of corruption in all parties.
Thank you, thank you. Heiko.
I think that which comes on a little ties into the question the gentleman asked, or mentioned, points the gentleman mentioned earlier on about progressive decisions by former Conservatives or Liberals within British capitalism, particularly in the late 19th century. It is perfectly true what you're saying. And that, I believe, was, if you like, a combination of the emergence of the working class as a political force, able to threaten, if you like, the power of the ruling classes, and make them then think carefully about what they're doing into the future so they can guarantee their power for 10 or 20 years or longer. Actually, British capitalism, from the 1850s to the 1890s, beginning of the 20th century, was the #1 power in the world. It was producing, England was producing more than 50% of world production in steel, coal, shipbuilding and so on. It was the #1. It's like China today. That's what Britain, as a tiny country, most of it was in England, was a manufacturing powerhouse of the entire planet. And how that changed with the interwar period that the United States took over in the 1920s and 30s, this resulted in the gradual decline of Britain and its interconnection with America as a subordinate state, which determined its, if you like, diplomatic and military role in the world. And on the other side, it also determined that as Britain ceased to be a major manufacturing power, it became a parasitic capitalist class that largely relied upon, if you like, financial machinations, manipulation. And all this was pushed forward under what they called Big Bang under Margaret Thatcher, where the City of London was given control over financial markets to do what they like. And cocaine was flowing and money was being made. In the City of London, the metals exchange, the financial exchanges, that's where the money was being made. The other element which affects all of us is that houses became objects of speculation as a primary factor, rather than council houses being built and everyone being, I remember I mentioned the other day, in the early 1980s, it was still possible for an 18-year-old in some boroughs to get a council flat, just as a single person, just to apply for a council flat and get one. Still possible in the 1980s, in the early years of Margaret Thatcher. But then once that was abolished, basically it became tighter and tighter and tighter and more difficult to get public housing or housing associations. Then housing became an entirely parasitic operation, both in rental and in speculative capital. And that's why house prices are so absurd in London, because finances and making money is no longer done by producing things to make money, producing goods under industrial capitalism, but instead of this, we throw our money into speculative objects. There's probably a whole load of people in this room who at some time or other started gambling on bitcoins, for example, and other type of speculative activities. Many people in Britain rely upon investment in housing in order to try and get a pension, because Britain is not manufacturing. We want to return Britain to a manufacturing economy based on huge public investment and the seizure of the largest enterprises that allow the economy to be developed for the interest and directed towards the interest of the majority of the population in the long term.
Thank you very much. Does that answer your question? Corruption? Yes. Okay. Brilliant. Thank you. Yes.
So I just want to preface this by saying this is probably more of a comment, less of a question. And to clarify, I don't have many sympathies for the Reform Party, but to pick up on your comment that reform is too disruptive of the cause, I think that that's really quite abhorrent, to be honest, because disruption, the notion that disruption is anyway bad for democracy is what perpetuates the system that we currently have. And I don't think it's a surprise that Labour and the Conservatives are always the least keen to have any change to first past the post because it keeps them in power, it keeps the status quo where it is, and it prevents any change from happening. So I think this notion that disruption is bad, disruption is good, it's necessary for democracy, and we live in a democracy that should be pluralistic. Allowing for disruption in the form of these parties that we may not like is necessary because it broadens our horizons, it gives us a chance at actually becoming a more representative society. So I get very frustrated by this constant sentiment that is perpetuated mainly by Labour and the Tories. It's just really pathetic.
No, I appreciate your point. I mean, I guess I was expressing a small c Conservative point here in the same way that I'm sure Labour would have probably expressed the same point in the 1980s about the impact of the SDP on them. I think, speaking as a Conservative candidate who's working very hard to try and create a more stable and more electable Conservative party, which I am. That's what I want to do. And one of my aims is I want to be a very good MP for you. I also want to be somebody that can play a part in helping to calm the party down. That may be naive, probably is naive, but I'd like to try and achieve that. So when I say disruptive, I don't want to give the impression that I am so conservative that I don't value disruption. Disruption is a fantastic thing. I mean, look, I admire entrepreneurs, whether they're social, whether they're financial entrepreneurs, business entrepreneurs, because they create change. And I really believe that some of those people have more impact, more positive impact on our society than the state. That's what we can debate later about how that can lead to global capitalism and the big tech companies. But certainly as a principle, how they can create real change is a good thing. I suppose my concern is that what's emerging right now is a very volatile political mix. And it's been volatile, and you're right, both around the world there's volatility, which always worries me, because volatility can lead to extremes, which can disrupt and damage people's lives, and actually create uncertainty, which creates a sense of anxiety, which doesn't create a happier society. And disruption, I think, in that sense, I'm speaking about that. The impact of someone like Farage, who is a great rabble-rouser, he's a brilliant broadcaster. I wish Peter would say now, but I don't believe Farage is a very good political operator. And by that what I mean is, in every example we've seen of Nigel Farage as an elected official or someone who can do work, he's tended to resign after a short period of time. Party leader, he's resigned about a number of times from UKIP and Reform. And that to me, from Brexit, that to me says, well, if he's elected in Clacton, will he do the full term? Will he be an effective MP for his constituents? Will he be lured away by going to work for Donald Trump and Fox TV in America, paid a fortune? So there's all sorts of question marks up there about his real motives and what he's doing. So again, that's disruptive, but is it good disruption? I don't know. I mean, I take the point that disruptive elements that create debate are always good. I do believe in the dialectic. I mean, it's funny, I did history, and so I fully accept the Marxist view of history. I'm not accepting Marxism, but accept the principles of forces that create change. And I think, yeah, I can happily subscribe to that concept of change through history, where you get an aristocracy replaced by other elements, and eventually a more democratic society. So in that sense, we have a certain amount of consensus. But equally, that's all been created by disruption. Whether it's the Chartists, whether it's the Great Reform Act, whether it's things that gave us more democracy in Britain. And that's a good thing. So I'm not against disruption, but I mean, speaking as a Conservative Party candidate now, who's desperate to try and make the party more cohesive, more electable, less volatile, I don't feel Reform are trying to create a better society. I think they want to just blow up the Conservative Party. And that will lead to could lead to a very powerful Labour Party, which will be very difficult to oppose. One of my, as you'll see in literature coming out, what I'm standing for is, I want to be that person that is not going to be in hock to the mayor, as I believe Fleur Anderson is. Fleur Anderson is a mayor apologist. All of our problems from the bus cuts to the bridge, she distracts everybody by saying it's the government's fault. It's not. The mayor's done the cuts. That's what a Labour MP does with a Labour mayor. And Labour MP, again, defends what the Labour Council are doing on the Ashburton estate, which is horrific and wrong. And if there's a Labour government and things are happening, let's take school fees. A lot of people in this constituency use private education. Putney's got one of the highest independent school profiles of anywhere in the UK. Wandsworth is 23.3. We don't know Putney, but we know there are 11 independent schools in Putney and about 3,500 pupils in those schools. So Putney has a very high proportion. Our Labour MP will do nothing to stand up for people who use private education in Putney, because she's defending the Labour Party. On every level, this MP is an apologist of the Labour Party. I would be disruptive and say no, 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 and oppose them and shout them out. That's what I want to be, as an independently minded Conservative MP in a Labour one-party state. That's my pledge.
Okay. Lovely, thank you. I'm being more free with time, you'll have noticed, people have come. Because, no, because we only have a small number of candidates, and I think it's important people get a chance to really answer the questions. But Heiko, you have a chance to respond. So
I won't spend too long.
Disruption being a good force in politics. Yes.
You mentioned the idea of the philosophy of change, and the philosophy is what was the sort of central focus of the discussion. So yes, we have agreement on that. Change is the basic law, and stability takes on various forms, various appearances, but eventually, when the pressures that give rise to transformation accumulate imperceptibly, slowly under the surface, suddenly there'll be a transformation, and a lot of people don't expect that transformation. Jeremy Corbyn was an example of that. Boris Johnson was an example of that. The Brexit vote was an example of that. The votes in Europe are examples of that. They're political manifestations of underlying currents affecting society. The natural instinct of man is conservative. People want to keep things as they are, to keep the stability around them, to maintain things and advance things for their children and the next generation. But the reality of the social system we live in is that's not the reality of the possibilities that they face. And therefore, people become shocked because they tried to do their best. They behaved themselves. They worked hard. They struggled all their lives. And then suddenly, bang, the whole external environment impacts them, and initially they're generally not sure what the reason is. For example, the Ukraine war, that was blamed as the reason why living standards collapsed in Britain and inflation went through the roof. I mean, it's partly true that that's the reason, but underneath it is a much wider question. But I won't go into that now, but the point is that there are background factors shaping these processes, and people respond to them. Their ideas come into correspondence with them only by necessity, if you like. History reflects itself, if you like, through accidents, but the accidents are produced by necessity, by objective forces underneath the surface that we generally don't look at.
Okay, thank you.